Somewhere on the eastern edge of the Himalayas stands a mountain that has no legend of its own, the third highest peak on the planet, Kangchenjunga. On the border between Nepal and the Indian state of Sikkim, its peers on the list of 8,000ers, Everest and K2, have gathered a mass of books, films, records, and names around them. Kangchenjunga has almost none of those books and films. It has stood off to the side of the climbing world for 70 years, ever since the very first ascent. And things happen on it, again and again, that simply don't happen on other big mountains. The mountain turns expeditions away for no visible reason at all. Experienced climbers with a dozen 8,000ers behind them don't come back from the descent. Dozens of people who have claimed all 14 of the planet's 8,000ers never actually reach the true summit of Kangchenjunga, and they don't even know it. This video is about why the third highest peak in the world has spent decades in the shadow of its two neighbors, about the factors that cut people off from it before they even reach base camp, and about a scenario that repeats itself on its slopes over and over again, and has done so for 30 years. Everyone knows Everest and K2. Few people remember the third highest peak in the world, Kangchenjunga, 8,586 meters, just 263 meters lower than Everest. It's one of the four great peaks on the planet, together with Everest, K2, and Lhasa, and the most forgotten of them all. In the entire history of climbing, around 7,000 unique climbers have reached the summit of Everest. On Kangchenjunga, around 500. Counting repeat ascents, Everest has racked up nearly 13,000 summits. Kangchenjunga, somewhere around 770 years. In 2025, Nepal collected around $4 million in Everest permits. From Kangchenjunga permits, 74,000, more than 50 times less. In the modern era, Everest has become safe in a certain sense. Since the year 2000, the death rate among those who go above base camp has held at around 1%. On Kangchenjunga, it has stayed in the double digits for decades, and unlike on other 8,000ers, the death rate on Kangchenjunga is not falling. The 2024 season on this mountain ended without a single summit. For the first time in decades, expeditions went home with nothing. Even though all the gear, the Sherpas, and the clients were in place, the third highest peak in the world runs on a completely different schedule than its famous neighbors, and you can see it in every single number. Kangchenjunga is not a single peak, it's a family. The main point of the massif is Main, 8,586 meters. Along the ridge, three more 8,000ers adjoin it. Yalung Kang to the west, 8,505 meters. Central, 8,482. And south, 8,476. Plus a fifth peak, Kangbachen, 7,903 meters, just short of 8,000. All four main peaks stretch along a single ridge over a span of less than 3 kilometers. Between Main and its nearest neighbor, just 700 meters. By Himalayan standards, that's a density you won't find anywhere else. On the ridge itself, there are a few more points above 8,000 meters. They never got the status of separate peaks. Not enough drop down to the next saddle, as the surveyors put it. But physically, there they stand. On a strip 3 kilometers long, 4 named peaks and several more nameless humps of the same class. This creates a navigational backdrop we'll come back to later. When a climber goes above 8,000 meters in the dark, in the wind, in the fog, he sees several identical-looking peaks around him. Somewhere among them is the main one. Geographically, Kangchenjunga stands on the easternmost flank of the Greater Himalayas, where the range, just before it heads off into Bhutan, makes one final push and squeezes out 4 8,000ers in a row. To the west, Everest and the whole Khumbu region. To the south, Indian Darjeeling. On the map, Kangchenjunga is 125 kilometers east of Everest and 74 kilometers north of Darjeeling. The border between Nepal and Sikkim runs right along its ridge. It's the easternmost of all the peaks on the planet that rise above 8,000 meters. For 7 decades, climbers have been coming up here, but in numbers that don't compare to its better-known neighbor, 125 kilometers to the west. Everest is easier to get to than it seems. Kangchenjunga is not. It's not a difference in days of travel. It's a difference in the reliability of the entire logistics chain. To Everest, trekkers fly into Lukla, a tiny airport at the start of the route, served by dozens of flights a day. 30 minutes flight from Kathmandu, and you're at the start of the trek. Lukla is busy from morning to night. If the weather is bad, they bring in helicopters. There is no such airport near Kangchenjunga. The nearest to the mountain is Sukatar in Tapalajung, one flight a week on a small twin otter. And that flight is often cancelled for months on end. A mountain airfield, unstable weather, limited service. The standard alternative is to fly into lowland Bhadrapur, right by the Indian border. From there, it's 8 or 9 hours by jeep on a mountain road to Tapalajung. The road is rough, and it washes out in the rainy season. The trek itself, on foot from Tapalajung to base camp, takes 6 to 8 days, about the same as from Lukla to Everest base camp. The paradox, in terms of days, the two routes are almost identical. The difference is what's around you. On the way to Everest, dozens of lodges, cafes, grocery shops, restaurants with menus in 3 sizes, coffee houses and Namche Bazaar. It's a little mountain town, several days walk long. On the way to Kangchenjunga, simple tea houses, less food, electricity less often, worse communications. 1 or 2 options for dinner, rice with lentils. Khumbu pushes tens of thousands of trekkers through itself every year. The region around Kangchenjunga, a few hundred. Additional restrictions all push in the same direction. In Nepal, there's a rule. You can't head out on a trek alone, at least 2 people plus a licensed guide. A rescue helicopter can barely rise above 6,500 meters, and almost all the accidents on this mountain happen far higher than that. This is the first filter. Before you even step onto the route, the mountain cuts off its own clientele. The second filter is the weather. Kangchenjunga is the easternmost of all the 8,000ers on the planet, and that geography determines everything that happens on the mountain from spring through autumn. The southwest monsoon arrives in the Himalayas from the Bay of Bengal. It's an enormous mass of moist air that moves northwest into India every year. Kangchenjunga stands right in its path, first among all the big peaks in the region. The monsoon will reach Everest, over 100 kilometers to the west, several days later. It reaches Kangchenjunga right away. The window for a summit here runs from late April to roughly the 25th of May. 3 or 4 weeks of stable weather between the winter storms and the start of the monsoon. Everest's window lasts the whole of May. A week longer. That week is the critical difference. When it's still calm on Everest and you can wait for a weather window, the monsoon front is already approaching the foot of Kangchenjunga. Teams are forced either to take the risk in a shortened window or to turn around and go home with nothing. In the 2024 season, it was exactly the second. Nobody made it in time. On top of the weather factor comes the avalanche factor. The eastern Himalayas get significantly more precipitation than the central ones. On Kangchenjunga's slopes, the snow load is higher. Avalanches here are not a rare exception. They are part of the background statistics. In 1905, Aleister Crowley's British expedition lost 4 people in an avalanche on the southern slope. It was the first serious attempt at an ascent, and it became the first tragedy. In 1930, an international expedition led by Gunther Dürenfurth ran into an avalanche on the route. The Sherpa Chetan was killed. In 2014, an avalanche took the Indian woman Chanda Gayan and 2 of her Sherpas on the descent from the neighboring peak Yalungkong. Kangchenjunga is the mountain that meets the monsoon first. That's a powerful advantage for the farmers of Bengal, and a brutal condition for anyone who wants to climb it. The third filter is the route itself. The classic approach is the Yalung Face, the southwest spur, the same path the first climbers took. Base camp sits at 5,400 meters, the summit at 8,586. The vertical gain to the very top, almost 3,000 meters. That's serious altitude even for an experienced team. The route is broken into 4 high camps. Up to the third camp at over 7,000 meters, it's a relatively typical 8,000er approach. Glacier, seracs, fixed ropes. After that begins what sets Kangchenjunga apart from its neighbors. The last high camp sits at 7,500 to 7,600 meters, from there to the summit, about a kilometer of vertical. That's the longest final stretch of any 8,000er on the planet. For comparison, on Everest, by the classic route, it's about 850 meters from the South Col to the summit. On K2, roughly the same. A kilometer of vertical in the death zone means, on average, 11 to 13 hours of work going up, plus 8 or 9 hours coming down. That works out to a clean 20-hour push out of camp, which the climber does at an altitude where the body no longer recovers, and the route itself is technically difficult. Above 8,000 meters, there's a rock section where you have to climb in mittens and crampons on your boots, with a severe shortage of oxygen. The difficulty is roughly third class on the climbing grading scale. At sea level, that's easy, but at 8,500 meters, it's work right on the edge. A little higher, a rock chimney you have to rappel down. Most 8,000ers don't have anything like that. On the classic line, you go up snow and ice with fixed ropes. Add it all up, and you get a death rate among expedition members of 3%, against 1.5% on Everest. Twice as high, even though the mountain is 263 meters shorter. This is not a route for a commercial client. The technical difficulty filters out the people who buy a turnkey ascent. But remoteness, weather, and technique aren't the whole story. Kangchenjunga has a navigational trap all its own, one that no other 8,000er has. At an altitude of about 8,250 meters, the route to the main summit splits in two. One couloir goes off to the left, the other to the right, and they look almost identical. In the climbing literature, this place is called the Y-shaped couloir. The right one leads to the main summit. The wrong one ends in a dead end at a little over 8,000 meters, with no way up. To this Y-shaped couloir, you add those closely spaced sub-peaks we talked about earlier. Yalangkong, Central South. 4 summits on a 3-kilometer stretch. From a certain angle, and in poor visibility, they get confused with one another. On Everest, there's no such problem. There's only one summit, and you can see it from dozens of kilometers away. There are many documented mistakes on this mountain. On the 18th of May, 2023, the Sherpa rope-fixing team took the wrong couloir. A small group of climbers, following behind them, went up into the trap and turned around at 8,100 meters. The only ones to reach the summit that day were a rope team of the Norwegian Kristen Harila and 2 Sherpas. They had split off earlier, found the right way, and stood on the point itself around 1 in the afternoon. A 2022 study by the German Himalayan chronicler Eberhard Jurgowski revealed something that had gone unnoticed for a long time. Of the dozens of climbers who have officially completed all 14 8,000ers, only a handful actually reached the true point of Kangchenjunga. The overwhelming majority stopped on a false summit some 6 to 10 meters lower and considered the ascent complete. Kangchenjunga is a mountain where people tick the box without reaching the real point, more often than on any other. On every 8,000er in Nepal, the same statistic holds. Of those who die on summit day, more than 3/4 do so on the descent, not the ascent. The ascent, 23% of fatalities. The descent, 77%. On Kangchenjunga, this skew is even harsher, and the reason is exactly that length of the final section we talked about earlier. A kilometer of vertical in the death zone going up is already a marathon. A kilometer back down, in the dark, after 20 hours of work. That's a different category of effort entirely. There are 4 risk factors on the descent, and they almost always converge together. The first, a late summit. If you look at the timeline of the hard cases on this mountain, you see the same picture every time. The summit reached after 5 in the evening. Stitzinger in 2023, around 5. The Hungarians Eros and Kiss in 2013, 6. The Chilean Vivanco in 2019, 5:30. A late summit means a descent in the dark. The second factor, hypoxia and exhaustion after prolonged effort above 8,000 meters without supplemental oxygen. By the time the descent begins, the climber has already been on his feet for 20 hours in conditions where the body doesn't recover. The third, no strength left at the summit itself. All the resources have been spent on the way up. After that, only momentum and stubbornness keep working. The fourth, weather and remoteness. If something goes wrong on the descent, a helicopter won't get here right away. Billy Bierling, the longtime keeper of the Himalayan database, said it plainly after the 2023 rescue operation. On Kangchenjunga, the weather often won't let anyone fly for 2 or 3 days. On Everest, by the classic route, there's an unbroken corridor of fixed ropes from camp all the way to the summit. On Kangchenjunga, the ropes are there, but even with them, the way back is more dangerous than the way up. All 4 mechanisms came together on this mountain in the spring of 2023 in a single story. The 25th of May, 2023, around 5 in the evening. Louis Stitzinger, a German mountain guide, 54 years old, reaches the main summit of Kangchenjunga, the last of his group. He already has 9 8,000ers behind him. He climbs Kangchenjunga in his signature style, without supplemental oxygen, without a personal Sherpa above base camp, with skis in his pack. His long-standing plan is to ski part of the slope, the way he had already done on Nanga Parbat, Broad Peak, and other 8,000ers. This is already his second attempt of the season. On the 18th of May, he had gone with the 7 Summit Treks team, but the rope fixers went into the wrong couloir, that very one we talked about. The group turned back. Luis returned to base camp, rested 3 days, and on the 22nd of May went up again. On the summit on the 25th of May, he looks at the slope, assesses the snow conditions, and decides against the skis. The skis stay in a cache lower down. He starts his descent on foot. Around 9 in the evening, the last radio contact. He reports by radio to the Peruvian climber Flor Cuenca, who is waiting for him at the 4th camp, that he's at 8,300 meters and will be down in a couple of hours. Cuenca waits all night. Outside the tent, she leaves a lamp switched on, so there'll be a marker. By dawn, there's no sign of Stitzinger. At 5:30 in the morning, on the 26th of May, Cuenca sends an SOS. A helicopter is assembled in Kathmandu, but the weather around the summit won't let the machine into the air. On the 27th and 28th of May, the flight attempts fail. On the 29th of May, a rescue team of 5 Sherpas with oxygen heads up into the mountains. On the 30th of May, they find Stitzinger at 8,400 meters. The expert assessment would later confirm a severe form of altitude sickness. From the moment of the last radio contact to the moment he was found, 5 days had passed. The Stitzinger case stands out only because it made the international news. It's part of a chain that stretches back decades. The 12th of May, 1992, around 8 in the evening, Wanda Rutkiewicz, a legend of Polish mountaineering, at 8,250 meters. Her rope partner, the Mexican Carlos Carsolio, descending from the summit, meets her there and offers to go down together. Rutkiewicz answers that she'll try in the morning. No sleeping bag, no stove, no food. She stayed there until morning. The body was never found. The 20th of May, 2013, around 6 in the evening, the Hungarian Zsolt Eros and Peter Kiss reach the main summit without oxygen and without a Sherpa. On the descent, they bivouac at 8,300 meters. In the morning, Kiss disappears. Eros, by then losing his orientation to altitude sickness, becomes harder and harder to understand on the radio. The last contact, around 3 in the afternoon, they were never found. The 20th of May, 2014, Chanda Gayan, the first civilian Indian woman to reach the main summit of Kangchenjunga, traverses after a successful ascent toward the neighboring Yalung Kong with 2 Sherpas. On the descent, an avalanche catches them. All 3 disappear. The 15th of May, 2019, around 5:30 in the evening, the Chilean Rodrigo Vivanco, climbing alone without oxygen, without a Sherpa, and without fixed ropes, reaches the main summit according to GPS readings. After that, the signal from the device stops. The body was never found. That same year, in 2019, 2 Indian clients of a commercial expedition also died on the descent, with Sherpas and oxygen. Their bodies were brought down off the mountain 2 days later and returned to their families in Kolkata. Kangchenjunga has been repeating the same scenario for 30 years. The same May, the same summit reached after 5 in the evening, the same failed descent. But the story of this mountain began much earlier, and it began with a promise. On the 25th of May, 1955, exactly 37 years before Rutkiewicz would sit down for her final bivouac, 2 Britons reached the main summit of Kangchenjunga for the first time in history. Evans is a serious man. On Everest in 1953, he was the deputy leader of the very team that brought Hillary and Tenzing to the top. He approaches Kangchenjunga just as carefully, and right before setting out on the route, in Gangtok, he meets with the Prime Minister of Sikkim. The local authorities have a request for the expedition. The mountain is special to the local people. They ask, climb it, but don't step on the summit point itself. Take a symbolic step below it, a gesture of respect. Evans agrees. On the 25th of May, 1955, Brown and band stop about 6 meters, horizontally from the true point. The next day, Norman Hardy and Tony Strether come up onto the same ridge and also stop just below. 4 Britons are the first in history to reach the summit, but they don't touch the summit itself. George Band would later write in his diary that he was too tired to take one more step, and he would add, glad he hadn't left a footprint on the point itself. In 1979, history repeats. Doug Scott, Peter Boardman, and Joe Tasker make the third ascent of Kangchenjunga in history, without oxygen, by a new route from the north side, in alpine style, with minimal equipment. It's one of the loudest achievements in 70s climbing, and they too stop about 3 meters from the true summit. The tradition born in 1955 lived on for decades. To this day, some climbers deliberately stop just below the point itself. On other 8,000ers, there's nothing like it, and that's the paradox. Kangchenjunga has everything for a great story, a tradition laid down by the first climbers, 30 years of a repeating scenario on its slopes, a route of world-class difficulty. And yet, in the popular memory, it isn't there. The reasons can be gathered into a simple formula. First, big mountains have their labels, and those labels work like magnets for people and money. Everest is the highest point on the planet, and that alone is enough to make it the great dream of ambitious people. K2 is the second highest and a universally recognized symbol of the professional challenge, the climber's mountain. Kangchenjunga is third, with no label. The third one with no label is something a broad audience doesn't remember. Second, on mountains with mass traffic, mass tragedies happen over time. On Everest, that event was the 1996 season, the deaths of 8 people in a single week in May. The story made it into John Krakauer's book, Into Thin Air, and then into a Hollywood film. The mountain documentary genre got its benchmark plot. In 2026, this tragedy turns 30 years old, and new material is being made about it once again. Kangchenjunga has no date like that of its own, no year, no book, no benchmark film. The death rate here is a slow drip, 1 or 2 people a season, with no concentration into a single loud event. No loud narrative comes together out of cases like these. Third, the route filters out the commercial client. The flow onto the mountain stays a trickle. Fewer people, fewer stories, fewer stories, fewer books and films, fewer books and films, fewer people who know about this mountain and want to get here. The books about Kangchenjunga were written only by the climbers themselves. Evans, Boardman posthumously, Scott posthumously too. A narrow professional circle. In the Netflix documentary 14 Peaks, about Nirmal Purya, Kangchenjunga appears as a checklist item. The result is a closed loop. Without a loud story, there's no flow. Without flow, there are no stories. Without stories, there's no loud story. And so it goes, decade after decade. This is how this mountain lives right now. In 2019, about 55 people bought a permit for Kangchenjunga. In 2022, 68. In 2023, 44. In that same May of 2023, the Norwegian Kristen Harla set the speed record for the 14 8,000ers, while Louise Stitzinger never came back from the descent. One season held both poles. In 2024, the expeditions arrived in their usual numbers. The season ended without a single summit. The rope-fixing teams went up to the final ridge twice and both times turned back, leaving the last 180 meters of rope unfixed. The Pakistani climber Naila Kiani spent 30 days at base camp with no result. In 2025, 41 foreigners bought a permit. About 30 people reached the main summit. That same season, the Frenchwoman Marguerite Morin died on the mountain. Right now, in mid-May of 2026, the situation is repeating. There still isn't a single summit on Kangchenjunga. The Sherpa team is still working its way through the route between the 3rd and 4th camps. A few climbers are waiting for their attempt. Among them, the Canadian Charles Page, who, after a successful Annapurna in April, has set off for the foot of the mountain. At this very same time, the mass pushes are already underway on Everest. There they've managed both to summit by the hundreds and to lose people, and to stage a feud between operators over leadership in the race to the top. 2 8,000ers, 125 kilometers between them, and 2 completely different worlds. Kangchenjunga lives by its own slow rhythm, the same 30 or 40 people a season, the same late Sherpas, the same silence in mid-May. And the main lesson of 2024 still stands. Even with money, operators, and willing climbers, the mountain can simply close itself. It needs no external band to do that.